Well, I have often wondered over the years, and particularly recently with the, sending out of stimulus checks and huge expenditures, whether the government can't just print money. In other words, just say, well, here's some money and we're going to do this with it, and it's not really taken from anything else or backed by gold or anything else. So, and I've asked a few friends who I think are very knowledgeable, and nobody's been able to give me a really good answer. So I tracked down an economist at the University of New Mexico, and he very kindly gave me this explanation, and I appreciate him doing this for me.
Well, the U.S. currency hasn't been backed by any metal in a very long time. It's been a fiat currency for decades. But there's nothing that prevents the government from doing that. The government of Venezuela is doing that right now. And nothing prevents it. The developed countries have realized that they have competing principal agent problems. Okay? The government, meaning elected representatives in the government, are the agents of the people, let's say, although in the U.S. it's more like the country than the people. And they have their own incentives that don't always align with what's best for the country. Right? They want to get reelected every 2 years, right?
They want to send me a check, yeah.
And they would love to send you a check because that makes you want to vote for them, right? So what developed countries have learned is that they need to have a firm separation between the fiscal authority, that's the government, and the monetary authority, which in the U.S. is the Federal Reserve System. Now, the Federal Reserve System is a different principal agent problem. In principle, they have the same principle, the country or the people, but the agents have their own incentives. And one of the criticisms of the Federal Reserve System, and it's completely apt, is that it's a good old boys club for bankers. So when what's good for bankers is also good for the country, their incentives line up. And that actually turns out to be much of the time. It's only under unusual circumstances that that's not the case, because they aren't up for re-election every 2 years. Right? So the problem is that elected representatives have an incentive to do things, to be basically economic populists, to do things that make them popular. And that turns into runaway inflation. It's what we saw in Europe in the early first half of the 20th century. We've seen more recently in Zimbabwe. We see right now in Venezuela. The government just prints money because that way they can pay their bills. They pay their bills with money that it just continues to increase the supply of money. And just like anything else in the universe, as the supply increases, the price goes down. Or in the case of money, the exchange value goes down. If a country is completely isolated economically, this won't be a problem, right? Because everybody's wages will go up, and as the prices go up, or they may even be able to hold the prices, as Richard Nixon did in the U.S. during a period of stagflation, be able to freeze prices as long as they're not trading with other countries. Once they start trading with other countries, the other countries have to go, the vendors and the buyers in the other country have to go, well, what is your money really worth? For a long, long time, those exchange rates were set formally and officially at fixed rates. And one way to do that was with gold and with silver. When I was a kid, when we were kids, right, the dollar bill said silver certificate on it because every dollar was backed up with some silver at Fort Knox. That system worked really well for a sort of horse and carriage world where things did not change very rapidly. The financial systems did not need to be adaptive. They really could have come up with the fiat system much sooner, and in some senses they did.
By the fiat system, you mean we just say this is so, this is money.
Right. This piece of paper is worth $1, whatever $1 is, right? That's fiat money, and that's been the case. It's been the case in the U.S. for a while. It's been the case in most developed economies for a very long time. Nobody Nobody serious is on the gold standard. It is too restrictive. It is one of the things that helped plummet this country into depression in the 1920s, was the fact that we had to honor a fixed number of dollars per ounce of gold. So fiat money is fiat money, and it works fine as long as you don't trade with other countries. What most modern economies did as of a couple of decades ago is to put their currencies on currency markets. And it's completely floating exchange rate. I use the word perfect, I don't mean that because it has other problems, but it's floating on a second-by-second basis. If you look at the exchange rates at the currency exchange markets, they're really jittery. They change all the time. Most of that is machine trading, saying, oh, the chairman of the Fed sneezed, the dollar goes up, or something like that, just crazy stuff. And it eventually averages out to what everybody in Japan reckons a dollar is worth in terms of yen, what everybody in the Eurozone reckons a dollar is worth in terms of euros. That would have to go away if the government did not show fiscal responsibility, and that is to maintain the real value of the dollar rather than the stated value of the dollar.
And when you print money for no reason or just because you want to, everybody in the world would know it, and they would simply say the U.S. dollar is worth less. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. Well, what if they churned out a bunch of money and sent us each $1,400 in cash, and didn't make it public that they were just doing that out of the blue sky? Why would it affect the value of our dollars that we receive?
So there's, in macroeconomics, we can talk about macroeconomics for a bit if you want, because it's part science and mostly mythology, right? But in macroeconomics, one way of looking at that is too many dollars chasing too few goods. If they increase the amount of money in the economy without increasing the goods available, people will compete for those goods. In principle, it's the same thing that happens with wages, and usually did up until 2008.
Oh.
We've had no evidence of wage competition at all since 2008, which means we're in a macroeconomics twilight zone until we figure out what's really going on. But the thing is that printing money, even whether you tell people you're doing it or not, there's going to be more competition for goods because there's more money to spend. The price of the goods go up. That's called inflation. Okay, yeah. So in the last election, various candidates and other contributors to the political dialogue were promoting modern monetary theory, which is a modern idea based on a very old idea called chartalism, I think. And that is that as long as a country prints its own money, it can do whatever it wants. Well, that's not exactly what the principles are. That a country would never default on its debt if it can print the money to pay it, and nobody disputes that. That's not controversial. That somehow is magical to the folks that promote MMT, modern monetary theory, but there's nothing magical about it. The reality in the U.S. and most developed economies is the government can print all the money they want. The central bank decides how much of it goes into circulation. So the Treasury could be there churning out dollar bills, in fact they are, churning out dollar bills all the time. They have to deposit into their bank. Their bank is called the Federal Reserve System. Federal Reserve System says, oh, you've already got enough money out there in the economy. We'll put this in the vault. And so the government actually can print money willy-nilly, on demand, as desired. And the central bank's job is their job is to keep it from being a problem. So flies.
We've got a Mike Pence thing going on here with this fly.
As soon as I mention politics, I get Mike Pence. So none of that is controversial. In fact, deficit spending has been the way the federal government solves many of its problems for a very long time, starting with the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
The U.S. government has spent more money than it takes in, right? deficit spending through its entire history, except for 1 week in the 1830s, I think. And incurred a great deal of debt to fight the Civil War, incurred a great deal of debt to fight the Spanish-American War, and the First World War, and the Second World War. And that debt has always shrunk to a really small fraction of the GDP because the economy has grown vigorously. That's part of the formula that's changed now. The U.S. economy is in the doldrums, as all developed economies are, stuck around 2 to 2.5% annual growth. And many economists think it's because we've picked all the low-hanging fruit in terms of economic growth, and it's gonna be at this rate for the foreseeable future. The thing about the embracing of modern monetary theory by the left is that it's been marketed as a way to have everything that we have now, plus free college tuition, plus universal health care, plus da-da-da-da. And the reality is that that's just kicking the can down the road, right? Because as long as those people who are proponents of very large defense spending, of very large subsidies of large corporations and oil corporations, as long as they continue to get their way, they will continue to grow their slice of the pie, and you can grow your slice of the pie if you're promoting free education and universal health care by making the pie bigger, or as George W. Bush once said, make the pie higher, right? You can make the pie bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Until you reach what? The scenario I just mentioned was when you're doing international trade and the currency markets realize that your money isn't worth what it used to be, then everything you import, it becomes very expensive. That's a large fraction of the consumer economy in the U.S., right?
Oh, yeah.
So you would have to somehow limit international trade. This is also on the agenda of many of the people who promoted MMT, and that is bring the steel industry home, bring the auto industry home, bring a lot of manufacturing jobs that have been offshored back home, and that would certainly accomplish that. But it would accomplish it with inflation.
I see. I didn't know there was more to that. Bring the jobs home than just bringing the jobs home. Yeah.
Well, the reason the jobs went away, aside from the fact that there's some special situations like the steel industry that did not want to upgrade its environmental footprint, and went to countries that would let them pollute. The jobs go away because the labor is cheaper.
Yeah, of
elsewhere.
course. Uh-huh.
So if you bring them home and you don't want to suddenly lower the minimum wage to $1.25, which is also antithetical to the agenda of the people who are promoting MMT, right? They want good wages, they want domestic jobs, they want free education, they want free health care, right? All of these things subsidized by the government, that is the taxpayers, as is done in every other developed country. By the way. It's not a crazy pipe dream, but it comes out of the same pot as having a global military and petro industry footprint, right? Our global presence as a country is very costly, and the left has decided that instead of arguing about books not bombs, right? An argument that goes back to our youths when we were eligible to be drafted to go to Vietnam, right?
Goes back to Eisenhower too. Yeah.
It does, actually, in the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
Instead of fighting that battle, the MMT proponents are, we can have it all. We can have it all. It reminds me of an old comedy skit that was, two can live as cheaply as one for half as long. Mm-hmm. Yes, we can have it all, but for a short period of time.
As Jackie Mason said, I've got enough money to last me the rest of have you heard this one?
No.
I've got enough money to last me the rest of my life as long as I don't buy anything.
Right. Yeah. And that's the sort of reality of this. Now the magic of MMT, the mythical thinking, or was it magical thinking of MMT, is that you would use taxes to slow inflation. So once you're at full employment, and no one's really clear what full employment means, but once you're at full employment, then you start getting inflation because of competition for workers, and then the government could increase taxes in order to slow down the economy. That's true. That's a true statement. It also means that you're now taking a job that is split between the central bank and the government, and they're opposing principal agent problems and giving all that power to the government. So your members of Congress that get reelected every 2 years are in total control of the economy instead of just the budgetary side of the economy. And so we've eliminated one of the principal agent problems that was there, by the way, to check the other principal agent problem. And that goes unchecked and gives them a lot more authority.
So the principal agent concern again of the bank of the what do you call it, central bank?
Central bank and the Federal Reserve System in the U.S.
Is to maintain the integrity of and the value of the money.
To keep it stable, actually. More than the integrity, and the integrity comes with stability, right? The bond markets just love a stable currency.
Yeah.
And in fact, the other thing about that, about just printing money, the U.S. incurs debt in the form, and they pay for that debt by selling Treasury bonds. And Treasury bonds, so when you buy stocks, right, you're buying a little corner of Apple Corp, right? When you buy a bond, you're buying a little bit of the debt, right? And so governments fund themselves by selling their debt in the form of bonds. The U.S. Treasury bond is the benchmark investment instrument in the world. It is the most stable, the most respected, the most available, the most exchanged financial instrument in the world. If you were to say, oh, let's just print money and we don't incur any debt, you have eliminated the benchmark financial instrument.
Yeah.
The day you did that, of course, it would be utter and total pandemonium. Unthinkable pandemonium. But once that's settled out, something else like it would have to be invented. Right? Now, it might be bonds in the Eurozone, it might be Chinese bonds.
Might be selling off public land.
Well, that's an interesting prospect as well. And that's the metallists, the people who are in favor of backing the currency with gold or silver. That's really narrow thinking. This country has a lot of assets. It has built-up assets, it has buildings and highways and airports, and it has natural assets. It has forests and Grand Canyon and coastlines and all kinds of other assets. That dollar will also always be backed up by something. Right? Always be backed up by something.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it very much.
Did I help at all?
Yes. Wasn't the easy, quickly digestible answer that I was hoping for, but I'll have to study it.
So the short answer is you can print money at will, but you probably don't want to. Before I was an economist, I was a physicist.
Yeah.
And there's these 3 laws of thermodynamics, which are often paraphrased as law number 1, you can't win the game. Law number 2, you can't even break even. Law number 3, you can't get out of the game. And when we talk about the economy, right, those things sort of apply in the sense that, yes, money is made up, but the reality is the economy, the U.S. economy or the Belgian economy or the Chinese economy, can only produce so much goods and services. There is only so much capital to build factories and buy tools. There are so many workers. You can't suddenly create a bunch of workers. I mean, people are talking about cloning and stuff, right? But the economy can only produce so much. And that's the law of thermodynamics that's applying here. That's all you got to play with.
You can't beat the house.
You can't beat the house.
Okay, cool.
Okay?
Thank you.
I hope it helped.